What up, everybody? It's your boy Cat. I've had a few people ask me how I do the coloring and texturing in Krita that I do, and specifically, at least one person has requested that I make a tutorial on it, so that's what I'll be doing today. I'll just be using this simple star as the base for what we're doing today, and I'm just going to be using the mirror tool just to make things a little bit easier on me. I have a bit of a heck of a cold going on right now, so excuse me if I sound a bit too stuffy. So what you're going to want to do is select your color over here in the little color wheel, and you have your background layer, and just lock that since you don't want to edit that. And you have your line art layer, you just lock that too since we don't want to edit that what we're coloring, unless you screwed up somewhere and only notice it while you're coloring, but that's just different, maybe different from what we're talking about. So anyways, just make a layer, a new layer underneath the line art layer, and I'll just call that color, just to get the point across there. And you select the fill bucket tool. I have the grow selection option enabled. Now what this does is basically, if you use the fill bucket tool like normal, you can see it'll leave some white or blank space, which you don't want if you want a clean picture. So what you're going to want to do is grow the selection, and the selection will basically just be whatever area the fill bucket would normally fill in, but it'll automatically grow it, so when you fill it in, you can see you don't get this line, it's gone. Now sometimes if your corners are very wedged in like this, it may not work entirely just because of how, you know, rounded corners don't suddenly expand into triangles, but this one appears to be okay for now. Check the others. Yeah, see, these need a little bit of filling in manually. Okay, then coloring's done. Now, for shading, you have a couple options as to how to stay within the lines. You could either select the color layer, go up here and select opaque, and then it'll automatically have, it'll basically just select the opaque pixels. It'll keep you within your coloring lines. What you could also do is have the alpha channel locked, and basically what that'll do is, if under normal circumstances this would happen, because, you know, you're just coloring outside of the lines, but if you have that enabled, then it's not going to show up anywhere outside of the color layer, assuming you have that enabled and visible below. Personally, I would recommend using the select opaque option, simply because there's less room for error if you forget to do something along the way. And you lock the color layer to make sure you don't shade that on accident, which I've done that in the past. That is a pain. Now for the texturing, basically what I do is I shade, but with this brush, the sponge texture brush. Now I make sure I have your colors are set to black and white here, and if you want different colored shading, then you can adjust that later, but for now just get the base of what you want to do down. So right now the default sponge texture is this. Yeah, that's an okay texture. It's not bad, but I don't know if it's like super fitting for a star. So what we're going to do is go up here to the brush options and select one of these. You can select any of these and you can preview what they look like in here. which you will notice this test box sort of carries over the uh, mirror tool effect. Of course, not all of these brushes here are going to be optimal texture brushes, but a lot of them are, and I don't know, it's just very useful. So I'm feeling planty today. Let's see if we can find a good plant texture. Bamboo leaves? Nah, I'm not feeling bamboo. Leaves? Nah, a bit too far spaced. Random vegetal. Yeah, boy, this is what I'm talking about. Let's give that star random vegetal. And basically, from here, you just kind of shade as normal. For the purposes of this, we'll say our light source is coming top down here. But it's going to be kind of a sloppy shading job, since obviously having something super accurate right now is not the point. Just showing you how this works. And to have the whole thing textured, sometimes I just like to go over it really lightly. Just go over the entire thing really lightly with the black color with the texture, and then have the actual shaded parts just more defined, filled in like that. And then once you have your blacks ready, and you can go onto your whites. Get out of here, Tumblr. I know you're coming for me. So yeah, just use these. You can either use this as like normal light shading or just highlights or whatever you want. I like to use it as normal light shading because it does help add to the overall texture. See, that's a nice looking star, but you know, it's not very yellow anymore. It's more like a yucky mix of weird grays and browns. Now, here's where the interesting part comes in. So, you select your dark layer, and you go up to the blending mode option, and I'm just gonna, you can do a whole bunch of stuff with this, but I'm just gonna show you what I usually do. I will move it down to overlay, so now you'll see it's basically just a darker color. The downside is that it can be hard to see like this, so especially at 50% opacity, that's not going to work. So I'll leave it at 100%, and then I will turn it to grain merge. That's still a little too much, so I'll just bring this down to 50%. Bring the overlay down. See, that's much more nicely shaded. And then we just repeat that for the light layer. Although for the light layer, I usually prefer to go with geometric mean because it preserves more of the color at the cost of not being quite as light. So basically, that just comes down to personal preference. But either way, that's pretty much it. Now you have a fully shaded and textured thingamabobberoonie jig. I hope this tutorial was helpful. If it wasn't, I'm not re-recording it. Yeah, good night.